See the red light, and it starts moving. See? Okay, it is blurry. Okay.
Very.
Okay. Why is it blurry? I don't know. Okay. Oh, that stinks. That's weird. We're gonna video anyway what we have. Move back, Mary. I'm gonna take my shot at it. Okay. At least we'll get it on audio.
Okay. Moving closer together.
Rick, I just want to welcome you to Massachusetts. We need candidates like you desperately, especially in Massachusetts, as you know.
do.
We're fighting the good fight.
Good for
And
you.
you know, and we can't thank you enough for your candidacy. This is exactly what we, the people of Massachusetts and the United States need. And we'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us what would you like the American people to hear. Just to let you know, we're on Worcester Cable Television, a program called Close to Home. It's the only Catholic program on the whole
Wonderful.
spectrum, and it's about people and events that elevate the dignity of human beings.
Well, I'm here at Massachusetts Citizens for Life, and it's an honor for me to be here. I'm actually replacing my wife tonight. She was supposed to be here, and she's not feeling well, so I'm here. And, the message is real simple, that without a respect for the dignity of human life, without strong families and strong faith that teaches virtue, our economy's not going to do well, our culture's not going to do well. It will not lead to a successful country. So, these are sort of the building blocks. There's an article out today in the paper that said the states that have the highest percentage of marriages, traditional marriages, are the wealthiest states in the country, and there's a direct correlation between economic success and family stability. Now, to most people, that's a shocking thing. But if you think about it, it's sort of common sense that healthy families produce a higher percentage of children who do better in school, who commit less crime, use less drugs, all those things. And again, you put that in conjunction with people who have strong faith commitment, where they teach morality and virtue. I mean, it all sort of weaves together, and we've sort of gotten away from that in this country.
We have.
And it's really important for us to understand that unless we have a president who's out there articulating this very common sense approach to how we start dealing with some of these uncommon problems that we have here in America, we're going to continue to struggle.
Well, we're behind you 150%.
Thank you.
We're going to get this message out on cable TV, and we ask for God's blessing for
Thank
you and
you.
your
Keep us in
family.
your prayers.
Is that your phone on the table?
Be ready for his speech.
Okay.
Oh, they took our flowers and our drink. So we're not going to find any room and any tables, I bet.
No.
Now, how do you watch it? Do you know?
Nope.
Okay. What happened, Miriam?
I don't know.
Well, it's a lesson learned. Fuck that we had this for a great opportunity.
Well, it's a good audio.
Miriam, we had it.
I know.
Okay, what I suggest you do is throw out there, sit in the lobby and see what's up.
Okay. Should
We'll
we?
leave it set up because we're going to need it for the speech.
I guess it's still going.
I know where I am, and I know what it takes to stand for what you're standing for tonight in a place like Massachusetts. I really do mean this in all sincerity. I want to thank each and every one of you, and I'm happy to stay here as long as I need to stay here to do that personally, because I went through those battles. Karen and I went through those battles, and I just am so appreciative of you're willing to have the courage to stand up for what you believe in and speak the truth, and shine the light in a very, very dark place. So thank you for that. Let me next apologize for being here. But I was in Dallas, Texas last night, and when I got on the plane this morning to fly home, I called Karen, and well, you know, between the costs, it was pretty clear she wasn't in any kind of shape to be able to do any kind of speaking, and so I was already on the plane, so I flew to where I was going, and then hopped on a plane to come here. And, be honest, she insisted on it. I had a whole lot of choice in that. So if I'm not going to be there, then you need to go and tell our story. Because I can tell you, the last few nights that I was home, Karen worked really hard on this talk. This is the only talk she's given the entire year. She's not doing any other speeches. And so she was really excited and had put a lot of time and energy in that talk. And is disappointed that she isn't here to give it to you. Let me assure you, it would have been much better than what you're going to hear from me. So I just want to say that everything I do and all the things you hear me talk about, I do because I have someone who I lay down to at night who cares as much, if not more, about this issue and these issues than I do. And I can tell you, having served with a lot of people in Congress, that it matters who you lay down with at night and the encouragement you get from the person that you are living your life with. And there are many reasons, as you will hear, why I began to stand up and fight for life. But I can tell you there's no way I would have taken the leadership I did if it wasn't for the tremendous encouragement and support that my wife Karen gave. So, let me just be honest, the reason is, as I was saying before, it's hard. I mean, I'm really happy that you honored Betty tonight and that you recognize these two other state representatives who are here. Because I can assure you, they are not popular people in their caucuses for the positions they take. It is not an easy thing to do in politics. Even, I can tell you, in Republican politics in Washington, D.C., even in some of the most conservative states. What you'll find, and certainly you find this in the Congress, I found out in the Congress. When I first got elected to the Congress, it was made very clear to me by all the political pros that you can be pro-life and that's great. No problem, vote pro-life, that's okay. But don't ever talk about it. Don't ever come to the floor of the House or the Senate and actually try to do anything. Because once you do that, you get labeled. You get labeled as, well, let's just put it this way, when I started doing it, my kids, when they would read the paper, thought that my first name had changed to Ultra. I always got a kick out of it when, I would be in the United States Senate and they'd say, the conservative, or in the case of me, ultra-conservative senator from Pennsylvania, and then the senator from Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy. No liberal, no ultra-liberal, just a regular old senator, right? But the media they love to just point out how out of step you are, how extreme you are, and you pay a price back home for that, but you also pay a price in your caucuses. Because if you're up there talking about these things and you're forcing votes on these things, let me assure you, your colleagues are giving you a hard time about it. Because they don't want to vote on these things. They don't want, unless they're trying to vote to make things worse. But if you're trying to actually pass pro-life legislation in Congress, let me assure you, even many in my caucus would scream and holler about trying to do anything and making them cast a vote on this issue. And I got to be honest with you, for the first 5 years I was in Congress, I was one of those guys. I voted pro-life. I didn't complain about pro-life legislation, but I vowed never, ever to talk about it. I was from a 60% Democratic district. You guys know what that's all about here. And when I got re-elected, I was redistricted after a reapportionment in 1992 to a 70% Democratic district. And I got elected anyway. And both times I took out Democratic incumbents. Then I ended up running for the United States Senate against a Democratic incumbent. And I won again. And one thing I didn't talk about during that campaign, one thing I vowed not to talk about on the floor of the House, was ever talk about abortion. I was pro-life and I stood up for my position, but I wasn't going to talk about it because that was just too polarizing an issue in a state like mine. The state's it's a pretty blue state these days and had 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans when I was running for the United States Senate. And so I came to the United States Senate as a good, strong pro-lifer, but very content to work on a lot of other important issues, really good important issues. Issues like balancing the budget and reforming welfare and all, strengthen our national security, etc. I mean, I had a full plate of things I was going to work on and had been involved in. But I was never going to talk about the issue of life until 2 people walked into my life. And one was a colleague of mine who I was just walking down, I'll never forget, walking down the hallway in the United States Capitol building. He walked up behind me, put his arm up, put his hand on my shoulder and said, Rick, every Thursday at noon we have a Bible study in the United States Senate and over in the library. And why don't you think about maybe joining us for that study? It was run by a guy named Lloyd John Ogilvie, who's still around, one of the great preachers. Have you ever heard his voice? I think that's what God sounds like, actually. And so he had a huge impact on me and my faith journey. And the other was when we came to the United States Senate. We had a young family, and we decided that the hours of the Senate were so bad, we just was never see my kids if they weren't hanging out with us in D.C. So we made the tough decision to move the family down, and it turned out to be the greatest blessing because we found a church, Catholic church in Great Falls, Virginia. And I remember walking into that church and hearing this pastor, Father Jerome Fasano. Father Jerome Fasano was up there, and he just put a bullet between my ears, right? Just boom, right there. And I sat there after the church, and I thought, I had never heard the gospel preached that way. Never heard it. I was 37 years old, and had never heard the gospel like that. And so I was blown away by it, and then I remember walking out of the church, saying hi to him, walking out to the car, and I got really angry. I spent 37 years and never heard the gospel preached. So here's my comment that I would make to both of you, both groups in this room. Those of you who are non-clergy, walk up someday and put your arm on someone's shoulder and spread the gospel. I know up here in New England, you aren't real keen on doing things like that. Amen? Amen. Actually, you think I did an amen now? I was a little worried when I said amen. Know where I am. I was introduced the other day at Prestonwood Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas at a candidate forum. They had a whole bunch of other candidates there, and I referred to myself as an evangelical Catholic. Ladies and gentlemen, we better start evangelizing. We're not going to have the opportunity to evangelize. That doesn't mean you have to go out in the street corner, but in your quiet, reserved New England way. Okay, don't put your hand on the shoulder, but you just grab him by the elbow. Okay? And just say, maybe you join me at church, or join me at a men's meeting, or a women's meeting, whatever it is. Speak the truth into this darkness. I love the work Mass Citizens for Life is doing. But they need more help. And they aren't going to get it unless the people in this state change. Not the legislators.
That's right.
Legislators reflect the values of the people in this state. And that means you have work to do. And I would say to the clergy, I heard a survey the other day that said that 90% of clergy in America, Christians, pastors, believe what the Bible teaches with respect to all the moral issues of the day. Marriage, life, etc. So they're all what they are. And 90% agree with what the Bible teaches. Then they ask another question. How many of you ever preach about any of those things on Sunday? And the answer was similar, oddly enough. 90% don't. So here's what I would say to you. If you don't have the courage to stand up and fight for the truth at a time when we need saints to preach the gospel, get out of the pulpit and let someone else do it. Part of my faith, going to church on Sunday, if you'd ask me, a quiz on Christianity, I'd check all the right boxes. I knew it all. But it was a part of my life. It wasn't the center of my life. It wasn't why I was living my life. It wasn't personal. It wasn't real to me. That changed over the course of about a year. Here's what I learned. I learned that God speaks to us in whispers. And unless you're close enough to hear it, you really don't know what God's will is for your life. And for me, even since that time, I have walked away because I sometimes don't want to know. I want to know what I want to do. I know what I want to do. And it may not be what He wants to do. And that's a comfortable distance to be. Close enough to sort of feel like you're with Him, but not close enough to actually hear what His call for you is. Well, His call for me was something I never expected. And it came out of the blue. It was on an issue called partial birth abortion. And I want to thank again the people of New England for thrusting me into that situation, because it was a senator from New Hampshire who was carrying that bill, and he was up for re-election, and he thought, I can't run for re-election in New Hampshire talking about this bill. So he said, I'm dropping the bill. We had to override President Clinton's veto, and he says, I'm not going to manage that bill on the floor. I can't, not running for election up here, I can't do that. And so it was one of those situations where I was in my second year in the United States Senate. He announced he wasn't going to manage the bill anymore, and it's sort of like everybody collectively took a step back, and there I was. And so I went from having never said a word on the issue of abortion in 5 years in the House and Senate to managing the most high-profile pro-life debate, maybe, in the history of our country, overriding President Clinton's veto. Long ovations. Now, for those of you who think, well, Rick is making a challenge to me and I'm not capable of doing this, let me repeat what I just said. I'm now managing the debate on the most high-profile pro-life issue that every paper is covering. It was the first time that we ever tried to override a presidential veto. And it was on an issue that was as controversial as you get. It's perfect for the media. And so all this media attention, and I've never, ever talked about this issue. And here's my encouragement to you. That if you are faithful, God will give you the grace and He will be faithful.
Amen.
And stood there on the floor of the United States Senate and went toe-to-toe with Barbara Boxer. I'm getting some time off of purgatory for that.
Did you do the box
Not
step?
all of you buy into that, but I am.
Toe to toe, was that the box?
We do.
And so, how do I know that God was be faithful? Well, we didn't win. We lost. But I'll never forget during that first debate, that one of the first days I had this, we entered into this debate. I was on the floor of the United States Senate, and I was responding to some of the remarks that one of the senators had made, comparing this procedure, partial birth abortion, where the baby is delivered all but the head. And as the doctor holds the baby in the hand, it's like what would happen in these Planned Parenthood videos to protect the organs. They would pierce the baby's skull with scissors, suction the baby's brains out to deliver the rest of the baby. That's what a partial birth abortion was. And I would describe this procedure and show graphs of how it worked. And one of the senators got up and said, well, if you had a description of removing an appendix, it would be, a horrible, ugly, gruesome thing. And later on, Senator Boxer was talking about how I didn't understand what options I was taking away from women. In fact, there were women outside the Senate chamber, and there were, who had had this procedure done, who were confronting senators as they came in, pleading with them. And she said, these women are out there crying because you're taking away an option that protected their health.
Right.
And I got up and responded to her, and I said, this is not an appendix. And you would be deafened by the cries of the babies who are not here to cry because of this procedure.
Yes.
And I repeated, this is not an appendix. It's a baby. It's a baby.
Yes.
And at that moment, you could hear the cry of a baby in the Senate chamber. You should Google the article. The Washington Post wrote a beautiful article about this. Because they said, for a moment, everybody froze, not knowing what to do. Because you have to be 6 years of age to be in the gallery in the United States Senate. I was in the Senate for 12 years and never, ever, other than that moment, heard a baby cry. But at that very moment, as was reported later by the Washington Post, the door to the gallery of the Senate up above opened at a time when out in the hallway there was a baby crying. At the very moment I said those words, the door was opened for a moment and then closed. If you are faithful, God will be faithful. We lost.
I know.
We lost then, we lost again 2 years later. We lost again, and the Supreme Court struck down a state statute that partial birth could never be legal in this country. But again, our plans are not God's plans. Our losses, with faith and fidelity to God, can be used for great victories for Him. And in fact, during that 5-year period, as we were losing the debate, losing the votes, we were winning the debate. And for the first time since Roe versus Wade, attitudes on abortion began to change in America. I fought many battles in the United States Senate, and I continued to fight up until I left the United States Senate. I have to add, involuntarily left the United States Senate. It was a pretty bad election year in 2006. And I thought that was sort of the end of my political career. That things had a good run. I liked it when I was 32. Left Congress when I was the United States Senate at the age of 48. Karen and I had 6 children. Life was pretty good. And I was off looking at other career opportunities and doing what I hadn't done enough of, spending time with Karen and the kids. And then we had a little miracle happen to us. Benny's talking about having a baby at 38. Try 48. Yeah, Abraham and Sarah here had a kid. I was 50, Karen was 48, and we found out we were pregnant too. You know, wow. And it was an amazing blessing. Until we got to the end of the pregnancy and the doctors kept looking and saying, oh, there's, you know, you're high risk, obviously, high risk. And they said, you know, they were monitoring the pregnancy pretty closely, and they said, something's just not right. So they monitored and they said, well, yeah, you should probably deliver early. The baby's not really growing as well as the baby should be growing. And so we delivered a little early. Little Isabella Maria came out, little Bella came out. She was beautiful. Just so excited. Everything was great. She was small. She was 3.5 pounds. It's a little thing. And so that she was in the neonatal intensive care unit. And we were so hopeful. And 4 days later, when the genetic test came back, we were told that our daughter had trisomy 18. It says, if you look it up in the medical literature, it says incompatible with life.
Oh.
We were told our little girl was going to die. It's one thing to fight the pro-life battle. It's another thing to live the pro-life battle. Bella's life embarked us on a path of living the pro-life battle after the child was born. We were sent home on hospice.
Oh my God.
After 10 days. Imagine bringing your baby home from the hospital on hospice. They told us there was no chance. 99% of these babies don't make it to 1 year. And I'll never forget being in the intensive care unit, and once they found out that she was who she is, most of the folks were great, but there's just 1 or 2 doctors just didn't quite treat her the same way. One of them was the doctor that we had an exit interview with to sort of give us our stuff to go home with, and she was doing fine. But we read all we could about this trisomy 18, and we found out that one of the big problems was respiratory failure, breathing difficulties, narrow airwaves, underdeveloped lungs, all those types of things. And so Karen, being a neonatal intensive care use, the nurse said, doctor, you know, I understand there's respiratory problems, there could be some distress, and can you give us a prescription for oxygen? So if she ever has any trouble, we can help her. He looked at her and said, why? Why do anything? That's what he said. Why do anything? And Karen didn't quite grasp that right away. And she explained why she thought she needed the oxygen. And then he said, you have to learn to let go. Well, at that point, Mama Bear stood up. So we got our prescription for oxygen. And, you know, hospice is an amazing and wonderful gift. And so it was just cumbersome. I have lots of stories to tell. I don't have a lot of time to tell them, but it was not a good experience for us. And we decided to end hospice and just go on our own. Try to do what we could to enjoy every single day of your life. When you're told your child has hours, days, weeks to live, it just puts a whole new priority system in place in your life. We had birthday parties for Bella every week. Every week we had a birthday party. And our hope was that she would live as many weeks as the rest of our kids would years. And the birthday parties went by week after week, and she was doing great. And the cold and flu season came. We had some tough bouts. We ended up in the hospital the first time after she had just got a cold, and they told us, be careful, these kids, they have very little reserve. And we just didn't realize how little it was. For 1 minute she seemed reasonably fine with a little cold, and the next minute she stopped breathing and her heart stopped. Bless Karen, CPR brought her back, EMTs came in, and And a few weeks later, she was recovering, but not fully recovered, got another cold. This time I was holding her, and she did the same thing. She seemed to be okay, struggling a little bit, but strong, and she wasn't strong, and the next thing she knows, she's turning blue, and I yell out for Karen, who's downstairs in the kitchen, and she had stopped breathing, and put her on the bed, and just, I didn't know what to do. Just tried to, encourage her to breathe. Karen came in and sort of shoved me out of the way, brought in the CPR stuff, went right to it, brought her back. All of our kids were gathered around. It was an amazing scene. Later that evening, we were in the emergency room. And she's getting worked on, and I called back to our house, and at the time, 12-year-old daughter, Sarah Maria, was there, and said to her, she asked how Bella was, and I said, Bella's doing fine. She said, Dad, Mom saved Bella's life. I said, that's right. And she said, Dad, you didn't do anything. Yeah, I told her to get used to that. But it was an amazing experience, going through and dealing with a child who was going to die. We prepared ourselves for the worst. But we prayed and we devoted ourselves to giving Bella a chance. But I got steeped in the issues of people with disabilities, and particularly this one, those with both cognitive and physical disabilities. Went to conferences and spoke at conferences on trisomy 18 and other genetic disorders that the medical community was not paying a whole lot of attention to, because these kids don't do very well. In other words, they don't live, I heard this term, both useful lives or lives worth living. And I remember as I went to these conferences, they were international conferences, and I'd hear the horror stories from Canada, of the European countries, socialized medicine countries, and how those countries had a utilitarian view of these children, and how children were denied care. And so when Obamacare got on the front and center stage, I couldn't just sit on the sidelines, because I knew what was coming. You obviously knew what was coming here in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And I said I was going to stand up and I was going to get out there and get involved back in politics, try to fight Obamacare, and stop the socialization of medicine, because once we turn patients into line items in the budget, then children and people who don't have useful lives are going to be the first to be rationed care for. So I went out there and I just started doing every program I could, traveling, doing anything to speak, to try to rally support against Obamacare. And an amazing thing happened one night. I always tried to announce where I was going, release it to the press. Nobody ever paid attention, usually. And then I released to the press a schedule for the next couple of weeks, of which one of my speeches was in Iowa. And so I got a call from Politico. Politico called and said, hey, I see you're going to Iowa. I said, yeah, I'm giving a speech in Dubuque. And they said, so you're running for president? I said, well, I'm giving a speech in Dubuque. Oh, so you're not running for president? I said, well, I didn't say I was or I wasn't. I'm just going to give a speech in Dubuque. Oh, so you are running for president? I said, it has nothing to do with running for president or not. He said, well, nobody goes to Iowa unless you're running for president. And I said, well, I am not, and I am not am. I said, I'm just going to give a speech. So later that evening, I'm sitting with my mother-in-law and Karen and the kids, and we're watching Hannity on television, and the crawl is going across the bottom, as you all know, and my mother-in-law screams out loud and says, Rick, you're running for president. It says it right there in Hannity. And they printed this front page thing saying, "Warren goes to Iowa, considering running for president." So I show up in Dubuque, packed house, C-SPAN cameras, national media, and I'm thinking, this is a good gig. You want to get your message out, that's great. So, a couple weeks later, I planned a trip to New Hampshire. Same thing happened. So I just started going to places, knowing if I went to these places, they would speculate and they'd show up. And I got a chance to talk about the issues I cared about. And so things one thing led to another, and you try to just follow what God's path is for you. And we ended up getting to the point where I was seriously considering running for president. And I said, I sat down with Karen one night. I said, we really have to have this conversation. I said, so what do you think? She said, no. I said, okay. And so I went through what I thought God was calling me to do and all this kind of stuff. And she looked at me and said, God cannot possibly want to put this family through another race like that. And then I said, well, let me tell you, listen, because I'm close now. Whisper it. I'm here. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm laying it all out there. So I laid it all out there to her, and she said, no. I said, okay, well, I'll put you down as undecided for right now. And so, we kept going down the path and kept doing the things I was doing. And eventually Karen came to me and she said, I knew God always wanted us to do this. I just don't want to do it. She says, I can't imagine why anybody would want to do it. After having gone through it, I can understand why she said that. So we decided to run for president. There was only one person in America encouraged me to run for president when I ran 4 years ago. And that's absolutely true. One person encouraged me. And that was my daughter, Sarah Maria. I remind you, I have 6 other children. And 3 months into the campaign, she recanted. But I ran this race. And yes, we didn't win, but we had some miraculous victories. 11 states, we did a whole bunch of amazing things, but maybe the most amazing thing that happened was during that debate, during that race, in February, after the South Carolina primary, I happened to come home for a day because, well, all the candidates had released their tax returns. That's one of the big things you have to do, release your tax returns. Everybody wanted Romney to release his tax returns because, Romney had a lot of money and everybody wanted to see what he was doing. And so I was the only candidate that hadn't released their tax returns. Nobody really cared about my tax returns. But I hadn't released them, so they're asking me, why aren't you releasing? Why aren't you releasing? I said, okay, I do my taxes on TurboTax. I do. And so I said, well, I don't have an accountant. I mean, if I got to release it, I got to go home and get my taxes together and release it. So we had just lost the South Carolina primary. It was Newton, Romney going at each other in Florida, and I was sort of a, appendage. So I decided, okay, I'll take a day off and I'll go home. And I'll get my taxes together and see my family, which I had been home for almost a month. And sat down and got home, and Bella was sick. She was feeling not so good, but she was gotten sicker since I saw her in South Carolina because the family was down with me. And that night she got really bad. And we couldn't keep her sats up, we couldn't keep her heart rate up, we couldn't keep anything up. And so we had to rush to the emergency room and take her in. And first thing, it was early wee hours of the morning, and called my staff when they got up and said that I'm not going back to Florida, we're suspending the campaign, and I take care of my daughter. They said, well, you just can't suspend the campaign, you just lost 2 states, and you're getting killed in Florida. If you just say you're suspending the campaign, they're going to say you're out of the race. I said, well, I'm going to protect the privacy of my daughter. And they said, well, but look, don't you want people to pray for you? Yeah, I do. So I said, we're suspending the campaign because my daughter is ill, and I asked everybody to pray for her. Went to the hospital that day, and they She could barely breathe. They did a chest x-ray, both of her lungs were full of fluid. They said she had pneumonia. Last time Bella had pneumonia when she was smaller, she was on a ventilator for 15 days. So Karen and I sat there, she was on very, very high concentration of oxygen and forcing it into her lungs, thinking this was it. And we got into this race because of Bella. Maybe this is why we're supposed to get out of this race. So we sat there for the first time for a long time and just had quiet time in the hospital room and just prayed all day. Usually when Bella gets sick like that, she gets progressively sick, and particularly, of course, at night. Everybody gets worse at night. She did get worse at night. In fact, she seemed to be getting better at night. Now, you got to understand, this is a little girl with chronic, seemed to be getting better. And the next morning, the doctors brought in the x-ray machine, x-rayed her again, and they came back and they showed me her x-rays, and her lungs were perfectly clear.
Wow, praise God. Amazing.
If you are faithful, God will be faithful.
Yes.
We wanted to wait 24 hours just to make sure that this wasn't just some momentary rebound. The next morning she was on the mend. She was doing great. So I called my staff. It was a Sunday morning, and I said, "We're back. Let's go. Put something together for Monday." And I said, "Well, it's no use going to Florida. They vote 2 or 3 days. Why don't you jump ahead and go to the next set of states? Not even the next state, but a little farther ahead. Try to get a fresh start." So I went to Missouri, St. Charles County, right outside of St. Louis. And I said, "Well, can we do something the next morning? I mean, it's 24 hours, but it's a Sunday." And they said, "Yeah, we'll try to pull something together at a community college. We'll have a rally and we'll talk about manufacturing." That's what I talked about a lot, last campaign and this one. And so I fly out there and drive into the campus, and there's all these people outside the arena, outside the auditorium. And I get on the phone immediately as I see them off in the distance, and I call my folks. I said, "Someone call the college and have them open up the doors." I said, "Nobody can get in." I said, it was a Sunday, Monday thing. I said, "They must not have just gotten the coordination." And so I pull up, and my staff comes up. I said, "Is someone get these doors open?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, look at all these people." And they said, "This is the overflow."
Oh, how wonderful. That's good.
I walked in, it was jam-packed to the rafters.
Wow.
But there's only 2 people I remember from that. I get up and I looked around and I saw these people cheering, and I looked over and there was a man standing there with a little girl. A trisomy 21 little girl.
Wow.
Trisomy 21 is Down syndrome, an extra 21st chromosome. Bella has Edwards syndrome, an extra 18th chromosome. And this little Down syndrome girl was on the shoulders of this young dad, and she was waving a sign as hard as you could wave a sign. And the sign said, "I'm for Bella's dad."
Oh.
I had people come up to me during the course of that campaign and afterwards, even celebrities who do not share our point of view on these issues. And one after another they came up and they thanked me for standing up for the dignity of my little girl. They know the truth. They know that life has value and meaning. Yet, because in our lost, dark world, most of the time they don't see it. Therefore, aborting children like that. Therefore, doing amniocentesis to find out that these children are in the womb so they can dispose of them. Yet, when they see the truth, they can't help but be moved by it. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is a dark place. And I know that you feel like you're losing a lot of battles. But let me assure you, if you are faithful, God will be faithful. If you go out and fight the fight, if you join this organization, support organizations like this, and people like the candidates we have here tonight, you can make a difference. One of my favorite writers is a guy named G.K. Chesterton. Okay, we have a few Catholics here. Chesterton was asked by a London tabloid to write an essay. This tabloid was a liberal tabloid that wanted to lampoon Chesterton for his conservative remarks because they asked him to write an article entitled, "What's Wrong with the World?" So they thought Chesterton would go on and harangue all of the evils of modernism. He said, "I'll do it. I'll take you on." Next day he submitted his essay, and here's what it said. "What's wrong with the world? I am." Respectfully submitted. G.K. Chesterton. Ladies and gentlemen, why were Bibles taken out of our schools? Why isn't the truth taught in our public education? Why do the policies at your business support lies about the nature of human life and, more importantly, the nature of family and marriage? Why is it the public square you can't even find politicians anymore that speak about truth, natural law, faith? Why are we losing the battle of the family? Why have we had 60 million people killed in this country? Let's just be honest. Because we let it happen. Oh, you can say, "Oh, I fought." They don't give us medals for participation. We believe in medals for winning. How is it possible that we have seen the social transformation in the last 60 years in this country? How is it possible? Who would have even conceived at the beginning of many of your lifetimes that America would be at this point? And what did we do? We sat like frogs in the pot and let the heat be turned up. And I understand why. Look, I get it. Life is still good. America is still free. We're still the most prosperous country in the world. We're probably still the most free country in the world. For now.
Yeah.
And all of us are saying, but I got mine.
Yeah.
My kids are going to be okay. You go on. One of my favorite sayings is every day we get up and we tell ourselves lies so we can live. We lie to ourselves that I can't make a difference. Look at all the people who refused to quit until abortion was legal in this country. Look at the people who refused to quit until marriage was transformed in this country. They didn't give up. Heck, we don't even lose and we give up. We're ready to move on to the next issue. Because, things are still pretty good. Until they're not. You're here for a reason tonight. You're here because you're supporting one of the organizations that's actually trying to do something in a state that needs a lot done.
Yes.
There's 500 of you here. 500! Imagine what you could do. People come up to me all the time when I talk and say, "Oh, Rick, okay, I get it." I say, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" And I have the same answer all the time. Do something. Don't walk out of here and give a check. Great, give a check. Give a check. But here's what I would say. I'll tell a little story. The last campaign, I was in Iowa, the Sunday before the Iowa caucuses, and I'd been to 385 town hall meetings, all 99 counties. Average attendance of those town hall meetings was about 10 or 12 people. 300 and some of them. I never gave up. And as the Sunday approached, there was a poll out that I was just all of a sudden skyrocketing. The poll was just coming out of nowhere. From 2 or 3% to, on that Sunday, 15%. It looked like maybe this huge upset could happen. I was speaking at a church in Sioux City. And I finished speaking at that church, and afterwards the pastor walked up to me and he handed me a little box. It looked like a cufflink box, you know, the felt cover. It looked like a nice little jewelry box. And so I opened it up and thought immediately they were cufflinks because they had 2 little round things, but they didn't have anything on the back, no fasteners on the back. And it looked like maybe coins, but they were sort of green and etched, old. I didn't know what they were. And so I just looked at it. I kept looking at it, thinking he'd say something, but he didn't. And he finally said, "Well, do you like it?" I said, "Oh, yeah. It's beautiful." Nice. And he said, "Well, do you know what they are?" I said, "Busted." No. He said, "I've seen you travel around this state. Nobody paid any attention to you. And you gave everything you have." He said, "God will bless that." He said, "I got these when I was in Jerusalem last. They're 2 widow's mites."
Wow.
2 widow's mites. You're here tonight because you're going to support this organization. How many are going to give the widow's mite?
I'll try.
How many are going to give something that is not just what you can afford to give, but something that's a little bit more, that hurts a little bit? You can offer it up and say, "Lord, I'm giving out of want because I'm trusting you to bless it." And that doesn't go from just giving here tonight, but when we walk out of here, living a culture of life. What can you do? How are your kids doing? They agree with you on all these issues? If not, why not? And what are you doing about it? How about your schools? You know the curriculum being taught in your schools? One woman got Bibles out of the schools. What could 500 do in the state of Massachusetts? If you wanted to. What's going on in your work? What's going on in politics? And who are you standing for? Who are you standing with? You standing for people who stand? Or you just say, "Well, we'll sort of wait and see how it all sorts out." Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the Declaration of Independence is a line. It's a wealthy people. People who had much to lose financially, family, life. But they were willing to stand up and sign their names to a document that had radical ideas about the dignity of life. And they said this: "We mutually pledge to each other." I often wondered why they said that. Because I would think, well, these are very religious men. Why didn't they say something more powerful? Like, "We pledge to Almighty God." Or some sort of oath or swearing before the Lord. But someone explained to me that these were also very practical men, very wise men. They realized that pledges to God, while certainly important, this was a time for accountability. This was a time to be held accountable. And that's why they pledged to each other. So they could be held accountable by someone here to what they were doing. So I would encourage each of you to find an accountability partner tonight and pledge to each other your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor. You never hear that term honor much anymore, do we? Amazing and powerful word. Honor. Your sacred honor. And let me say that if you do, here in Massachusetts, God will be faithful. God bless you.